Today's conversation is with a woman whose resume reads like a straight shot to the top. Global roles, boardrooms, billion-dollar crises navigated with grace. But behind that polished LinkedIn profile is a story most people never see. The private costs of ambition, the unlearning that comes along with leadership, and the weight of being one of the few women, and even fewer mothers of three, actually invited to the table. We talk about what success really demands and whether she'd pay that price again. We talk about raising daughters while redefining enough. And we talk about chronic pain and the surprising strength that comes from finally asking for help. If you've ever felt torn between drive and rest, motherhood and ambition, visibility and vulnerability, this is the episode you've been waiting for.
If you felt seen in this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with women in your circle who need to hear it.
Amy Kunrojpanya is a global business leader and tech optimist known for building teams, shaping reputations, and steering some of the world's most mission-driven companies through hypergrowth, transformation, and crisis. With more than 25 years across Coca-Cola, Google, Uber, and most recently as Vice President of Communications at Netflix, she is recognized as a trusted strategist with a deep love of cultural nuance, an eye for innovation, and a knack for solving complex problems with clarity and heart. Beyond her corporate career, Amy is a passionate advocate for women's health, anti-trafficking, and vulnerable communities. She is a founding member of Elevate, a board advisor to biowearable startup M, an executive producer of the documentary Sisterhood, a prolific mentor to women and girls across Asia, and an angel investor championing female founders. A mother of three and speaker of 8 Asian languages, she has lived and worked in more than 75 countries, bringing a rare global lens to every room she enters.
The Forties Formula. The Forties Formula.
The Forties Formula. Hosted by Jasmin Dhillon, integrated health strategist specializing in gut health, hormones, and midlife well-being.
And Amanda Lim, director of Lift Clinic and a leading expert in female strength and metabolism.
Named one of CNA's top podcasts and winner of the 2025 Asia Podcast Awards in the Best Health and Wellness Podcast category.
The Forties Formula is your no-fluff, science meets real-life guide to thriving in your 40s.
Amy, welcome. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
It is such a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Yeah,
me
we
too.
really are too. I remember the first time that I was actually in a room with you, hearing you speak, and your ability to just completely enthrall an audience, including myself. And I knew you, and I was like, wow, she has a presence. But I think, people see the big job after big job and the Amy, in front of them, but they don't always see kind of the story behind that. And that's really what we want to get into today. What's something that someone wouldn't see if they just clicked on your LinkedIn profile?
I think they wouldn't know that I've spent 30 years living with chronic pain.
Wow.
They may not know that I'm a first and only with my family when it comes to higher education. They might not know that I was born in a tiny country town, and that I come from really, really humble background. Sometimes when they see the shiny things, they assume that the path there was a straight one, but it has been very nonlinear, and I am better for it.
And I think you're exactly right. I think the assumption would be, well, the only way that she had all these big jobs and got into all these high places is because she had a really easy upbringing that got her, the first part of the way, and then she's just had a linear track ever since.
Yeah.
What's been the biggest bump in the road for you?
I don't know if I would say there's one thing, because I think the truth about having big dreams, about being driven, about thinking that the sky is the limit is that every time you push and every time there is momentum in your life, there's always something. That's true for motherhood. It's true for, the professional journeys that women are on. So I guess I would say part of it for me was understanding that, initially when I started working, I think that I really honestly believed that the path for me to be successful and to get recognition was to outperform everyone by outworking everyone. It wasn't just a mentality of kind of prove it again. It was also deliver so much that is so great that you cannot be ignored. But there's a price that comes with that, and it's a high one. And I look at that and I think now, especially as I mentor women who are earlier in their career, I would love people to have had the ability to say no to things I didn't know I could have at that time. Yeah.
And, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you right later in this conversation, but I think it works beautifully here, is what would you tell 20-year-old Amy? You mentioned what you're telling your mentees, but you specifically, how do you mentor yourself?
I think part of it is, this probably sounds a little bit light, but that it's actually going to be okay. There's a piece to it as well where, I can't speak to everyone, but I think if you are truly driven, if you have this insatiable fire in your belly that gets you out of bed every day and, kind of demands of you that you ask yourself, am I doing enough? Can I do more? What else can I do? Sometimes you also have a tremendous sense of impatience with yourself. And you can set rather arbitrary deadlines. You need to reach a certain title by a certain age. Maybe you have to have reached a salary band by a certain point. And so many of those things, like the pursuit of that one thing, can actually get in the way of something that is so much bigger and better than you can imagine because you're focused on the minutiae and not the bigger picture.
So you mentioned that there were struggles along the way. What would you say were some of the things that you really struggled with to get to where you are today?
I think initially, I have almost always been one of the youngest people in the room. And I definitely would say I have carried, in some of the earlier parts of my career, certainly the first 15 years, probably a chip on my shoulder about age and about being perceived, or the theory of being perceived as being less competent or less excellent because I may have less years of experience. And what I've learned, and I say this with as much humility as I can, but in my 20s I was too young for someone, in my 30s I was too young for someone, in my 40s I'm still too young for someone, and as I am now getting closer to 50 than 40, I'm sure at that point I'll still also be too young, but also too old for someone. So the truth is I think that some of these things that we carry as baggage, we are getting in our own way. So not kind of letting age be a thing, I guess, and doing the work and letting the work speak was part of it. I think another piece of it was finding my authentic voice. And we can definitely talk more about this because I don't think it's a one-liner type of insight. But when you are growing up professionally, you're still finding yourself. And I think a lot of young women believe that they're supposed to know. They're supposed to, pick their path, for example, if they go to university, then, kind of find that particular ladder that they're going to climb, head down, get climbing, and off you go. And some of the people that I admire the most in terms of their professional achievements and who they represent to me as leaders in industry, kind of lighthouses, it's not a straight line. They've taken, interesting left turns, they've pivoted, they've paused things, they've made choices that you wouldn't have expected that they made. And those things didn't stop them from being successful. They actually, kind of accelerated their success. And giving yourself permission to understand that the path isn't always something you can control. It isn't, beautiful steps that are all outlined for you. Because I will say to you, in my 20s, I knew exactly what I wanted to do.
Oh, same.
I had that path planned. I knew the job descriptions that I wanted. And a funny thing for me, I got one of the jobs that I thought would be my dream job. I started working at the beginning of my career as a civil servant. I worked for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And it was not what I hoped it would be. So the private sector was never part of the plan for me. And yet that pivot, someone seeing something in me and saying, hey, you should try this, changed the trajectory of my life. Another thing for me, the opportunity to come to Asia for the first time and how that got not just under my skin, but deep, deep in my bones and my heart, also changed the trajectory of my life. If I had never gotten on a plane, if I hadn't said yes to an opportunity, even when I wasn't quite sure, this amazing story that has unfolded would never have even started. Yeah.
Can we take a sidebar and talk about Asia for a second?
Yes.
I need two things clarified. Okay, this is and Amy and I have known each other for some time, but I don't know the answer to these two questions.
Okay.
I need to know how you came to speak all the languages that you speak, and I need to know the origins of meeting your husband.
Okay. These are fun.
These are fun questions, and I need to know both.
So, in a lot of ways, the focus on Asian languages for me, I'm very much the product or the byproduct of the foreign policy of my government at the time when I was in schooling. So we had a former Prime Minister that had a foreign policy that was called Asian engagement. And it was very much before its time. But his belief was that Australia needed to embrace its geographical reality and use that as a competitive advantage rather than see itself as kind of like the last bastion outpost of Europe and think of its primary partners as being in Europe and or the US. And so what he was trying to do is really embed an Asian IQ/EQ into the learning experience, both, from the youngest years all through. And then that led to a lot of programs like the one that I did my university degree with that allowed me to kind of go in and have immersive experiences in Asia. So, I learnt to count as a child in primary school. The first languages were in English and in Bahasa.
Wow.
When I had a choice to choose an elective language, the school that I was at, the choices were Japanese and Korean, not French, Italian and Spanish. So that was a fundamental shift from what, say, my parents' generation would have been exposed to as what was kind of normal and an offering. And interestingly, for my high school, in terms of Japanese, they were also practicing what's called immersive language labs, which means when you go into the building, you are only allowed to communicate in the language that you are there for instruction of. So if you needed to go to the bathroom and you didn't know how to say that, you were in trouble. So you learnt very quickly. Outside of kind of formal schooling, though, I also had, the opportunity, and I think it really is a privilege. I received scholarships to go overseas and get deep into places. So I spent a year living in a rural town, which is very close to my heart, in Thailand, and it was on the border of Cambodia and Laos. And there was a very large Khmer refugee community there. And while I was there, I learnt Thai, Lao, and Khmer, which is the Cambodian language. Interestingly, when I came home, I thought, that was really interesting. I'd like to see if I could make some use of this. Maybe I'll find out if there's a university that offers this language. And I found that most universities weren't interested in these languages. They weren't considered to have a large enough population to be kind of, a major or a majority study. But when I went in and asked if I could be assessed for my Thai skills, what I found out is I actually had a level of fluency, both in writing and speaking, that was the equivalent of having done the degree already.
Wow.
And that's when I realised actually what had felt easy and intuitive to me was actually not so normal. But to be honest, prior to that, I thought it was just about putting in the time and working and having a love for the thing that I was learning. And I came away from that realising actually this is something I do well and potentially do better than other people. And I just leaned in. So I went from that Thailand and that kind of, Southeast Asian Indochina experience. When I then went to university, I decided to structure my degree across Asian countries. So I started in Australia, I then went to Japan, I then went to mainland China, and I finished in Thailand. And then from there, I've had some amazing opportunities with work, but almost all of my roles have given me the opportunity to be working in multiple languages every day. Okay. And that's the key to not forgetting them, because you have to use them. And so the story for how I met my husband, the wonderful man that he is I went to a jazz festival with a girlfriend, and she said to me as we walked into this space, I feel it in my bones that you're going to be lucky, so you need to put your name card into the Lucky Door prize. And believe it or not, at midnight they pulled out my name card, and I went onto the stage and I, accepted a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue, so it was a rather special night.
Okay,
very
first
classy.
Of all, classy gift.
But when I, and they asked me in Thai, are you having a good time? And I responded, it's amazing, the music is so fantastic. I walked off the stage and I met my husband.
Wow.
And so we had this wonderful conversation. He asked me for my number. He called me the next day and we've been together ever since.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 25 years and counting.
Oh, wow. I was just about to ask how long.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're when I see their wedding pictures, I was like, oh, they were children.
Yeah.
these kids have been together a while. Oh, that is a beautiful story.
Yeah.
So Johnny Walker versus Sang, what was the bigger prize that night?
Totally Sang.
Okay, all right. That's for you, Sang. That's verified. So you've worked across all these countries, learned all these amazing languages. What have you needed to unlearn from, either your earlier roles or just from your earlier past experience?
I think when you are early in your career, particularly if you come straight out of university and you start working, when you are a student, so much of it is about individual recognition. You write the paper and it has your name on it. And then you get into a workplace and you realise that very often the product doesn't say by someone. You just have to ship it and have to trust that people will know. I think there's a truth that you can obviously always advocate for yourself. You can champion your work. You can find champions of your work. But interestingly for me, when I think about leadership as opposed to just individual contribution, I worked in organisations at a time when there were very few women in leadership. So I didn't, again, that concept of kind of growing up in the corporate space, I didn't really grow up observing women lead. I grew up with male bosses and male leaders and a particular type of leadership that was more common than not. And so one thing I had to unlearn was the idea that the loudest voice in the room is the leader. Another thing for me that has been, I will say, a good but a hard lesson when I continue to learn. I do love to talk, but but listening is one of the most important skills of a leader. Being able to listen deeply and actively and continuously. I think understanding that a leader isn't always front and centre, although sometimes you have to be, but you also have to walk alongside people. And I found for myself, the people that I think are the most spectacular leaders, the most creative, the most resilient, the most successful, the most centered and grounded, they're not showing people their superpowers. They're helping other people find their own superpowers. And so there's something about leadership that is about unlocking something in someone else, not just about what you showcase in yourself.
I was actually going to say, because your voice is very calm and it's very gentle. And, the fact that you just said that you don't need to be the loudest person in the room, but yet you can still get this amazing connection with people. It just, I feel it.
Yeah. Although I do tend to be the loudest person in the room. But
there's no shade on the loudest person, to be clear.
I cannot help myself. Okay, sorry guys. So you mentioned that when you were, as a younger professional, you didn't have a lot to look up to. You didn't see a lot of women in roles that you wanted or that you were aspiring toward. But your daughters do get to see that. They don't just get to see it, tangentially in the working world. They get to see it in their house with you.
Yeah.
What do you want your daughters to learn from your example as a working mom?
So the first thing I would caveat is I want my daughters and my son to learn this, but I totally hear the point.
Yeah.
I think the first thing is I want them to know that I was fearless in my pursuit of excellence. I want them to know that I said yes to the adventure, even when I wasn't feeling ready or, knowing for sure. That I went into every room and every relationship with empathy. Equal parts head and heart, and that matters. And that everything that I did it for them, but also that I couldn't do it without them, and that, that's part of what has given me this drive and what has made me this person.
Yeah.
How old are your children?
My the short answer is 5, 3, and 1.
Okay.
But, with children, we get into months and we're kind of approaching birthdays, so...
Yeah. You can always remember hers and mine are the same.
Basically,
okay.
Easy. Amanda and I not only know each other, we've literally been on pregnancy journeys in parallel.
It's been literal parallels.
Yeah, it's been quite an amazing thing.
So recently, my husband and I started watching this program on Amazon, and it's called Special Ops Lioness. Has anyone seen it? Heard of it?
I have.
Yeah.
Okay. It's about a CIA agent. She is a female. She's very high level. I don't want to, kill off what the story is about, but she has a family. So she's married. She's got 2 daughters, and her relationship with her eldest daughter is not great because obviously she's a field agent. So she's been out of the home environment. And then the husband's also working, and he's also busy because he's a surgeon. So he's not really around. I mean, he's trying to be around, but he's not around as much as he can be. And it's really made their situation difficult, like the relationship between the mother and daughter. Is that something you worry about, being in such a high-powered position, and about the time that you can give to your kids and how it would affect them? Because obviously they're quite little now, but obviously as they get older, that's such a, it's a big thing. And it's something that's been playing on my mind as well. Like, I need to spend time with my children because they do need me. And, everything that I'm doing, I say I'm doing it for them. But is it really for them? I don't know. This is just such a deep
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And look, I think, someone once said this to me, that every mother's middle name is guilt. Yes. And I think that there is a truth to that. So what I would say to you is I have learnt, through hard lessons myself, but I think that the best gift that you can give them is your undivided attention, no matter how much the time is. Because especially when they're little, and obviously this changes as they get older, but children don't necessarily have the same sense of time that we do. My children are now starting to learn to read the clock, so I have to be more mindful of that. But I say this because if you're in the room with them, but you're not in the room with them, it's like you're not in the room at all.
Yeah.
And, what I realize is this idea of like looking up from your device, saying, I'm just going to finish this while you do that thing. They just want you.
Yeah.
They just want to know that you are in it, whatever it is, with them. And I think to myself, right now they're very small, so they need me in quite a physical way that's going to change, as they get older. But I also think about my experience of being a teenager, of the teenagers that I have kind of taken under my wing for different reasons, sometimes because they've had, real problems in their life, and other times because they've just been people that reminded me of me, and I really wanted to kind of see, can I do anything to accelerate or amplify, their opportunities. So much of it is about access. It's about being able to open yourself up. And I think one thing that I'm trying to do more of, and it's not an easy, intuitive thing for me, but the point about vulnerability and about letting them see you, all of you. I I think a lot of what I saw modelled as motherhood from working women was often that they were invisible parents. You know, they didn't, not that they have to have every conversation led by a story about their children, but it was kind of an inconvenience that was on the side and kind of either not talked about or kind of not really acknowledged. And I think that for my children to get everything that they deserve from me, I have to make choices every day about when I am fully present for work and when I'm fully present for them. And in some ways it has to be somewhat non-negotiable. So I say this as an example. I had an amazing C-suite executive who had 3 children while she was in the C-suite. And she said to me, you know, if nothing else, what I have taught the CEO of the company is that between 5 and 7, I'm unavailable because that's bath time and bedtime. And I thought to myself, maybe you have to be a C-suite executive to be able to draw those lines. But as I have experienced, you know, different roles in different organizations, I realized that setting a boundary is an act of self-love, but enforcing the boundary is an act of self-respect. And so when you really lean into that, you realize that every day you make choices and you always have a choice about how you allocate your time and your energy, especially when it comes to your kids.
God, I love that. I love that.
And I love the language you used about teaching the CEO what a boundary looks like.
Yeah.
I didn't ask for it. I didn't beg for it. I didn't freak out about it. I said it, and I taught someone a lesson.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very powerful use of language. So we have our beautiful sponsors here on the Forties Formula, the Meat Club, and they have submitted a question to ask. So I thought this one would be right up your alley, girl, because I know you love a good steak, okay? What is your go-to kind of, you know, favorite protein-packed meal that you always go for when you're traveling or on the road?
So this is probably going to sound very boring, but I actually think it's an amazing thing to have a great steak that is with, you know, lots of pepper, you know, the coarse grains of salt.
Yes.
I don't even necessarily need sauces, but it's the letting the meat kind of just sing.
Is that the Australia in you?
I'm sure it is. I apologize to any vegan or vegetarian listening that feels affronted.
Yeah, no apologies needed because, again, Meat Club does source all of their meats from Australia and New Zealand, so you are just representing your nation, my dear. So thank you for that.
And they do offer a subscription service with $20 off your first order if you use code TFF20 today.
So talk to us a little bit about that balancing ambition, right? Because it seems like such a kind of canned question, right? How do you balance being a mom and work? Yeah. But I think women need to hear about specific strategies, the one you just mentioned, right? Teaching a boundary or setting a line. What are some of the specific strategies that you have used in balancing your motherhood with your role in the workplace?
So the first thing that I would say, I don't think this is controversial, but I also don't think perhaps a lot of women give themselves permission to say this out loud. I no longer believe in work-life balance.
Oh, I was just thinking that. I was thinking, is there really a balance?
So I think the concept of balance is both triggering and somewhat a false equivalency, because I think the problem that happens when we come back to the idea, whether you are a working mother or just a working woman, the idea of balance, I think, creates a situation where you always feel like you are failing.
Yeah.
Because there's no world where you kind of, you know, you reach the top of the mountain and then you have arrived, balance is yours, you know, and you hold your breath and you enjoy that moment. The truth is that every single day, every decision you make tips you one way or the other, a little bit more in favour of home or personal requirements and a little bit more in favour of work. There are days when I feel like I am kicking ass at my job, and that's not normally the same day that I feel like I'm being the best mother I can be. You know, there are other days, for example, where I feel like I've really allowed myself to come home with something to give to my husband, that I'm not completely depleted. And then there are other days where, you know, I'm really operating on zero and I'm like, thank you, babe, for taking care of the kids, you know, for this particular thing that I would normally do. So it's not, I think, again, it's not a linear thing, but if I think about specific strategies, I think the first one of them is understanding, like really honestly for yourself, what matters to you. So as an example, one of the things that I feel really strongly about, because it's such an important part of who I am, is I love reading voraciously, everything in any language. Like I just love it, right? Love listening to podcasts, shout out the Forties Formula. But I love being able to immerse myself in different worlds. I love the learning that comes from reading facts, you know, all of this stuff. And so I want to raise readers. And so for me, for example, that means time that is spent reading with my children is precious. Because if I don't invest in that, you know, it's not just about a developmental milestone. It's about how can I embed something in them that stays with them forever, no matter, you know, kind of what room they're in, you know, how they evolve as adults. So carving out time to do that matters to me, for example. When I'm on the road, and obviously it's different for everybody, I'm really mindful, especially because my children are very young. My husband is the primary caregiver of our children. He made the sacrifice so that I could continue to do what I do and that our children could be raised by, a parent, which is an amazing, and having their dad be that person is such a special gift and not so common. So it's a really unique situation for us. And I find that as an example, for me, because I have travelled so extensively for my job, and Amanda knows this firsthand, but I would say probably the last 10, potentially even the last 15 years, my average, kind of work travel schedule was between 70 and 90% of the time on the road.
Wow.
It's an average of, somewhere almost touching or over 300 days a year. And when you have very small children, that means that you are away a lot. So for me, one thing that I did that helped me deal with some of the guilt, rightly or wrongly, is I made the decision that I would continue to pump so that I could give my children what I deemed to be the best that I had to offer, even though I wasn't with them. And with that comes a sacrifice in time. It comes learning about the logistics of how to, ship and store. It comes with keeping your body in a shape that actually you can make that contribution and it's meaningful. So I don't think it's so much just about, I color code my calendar or, I carve out this time. I know there are people who believe, for example, in the boundaries, setting sacred spaces in your calendar or telling people certain things are off limits. But the thing that I would say is what you do is so much more important than what you say. And in particular, I say this very, very sincerely, I waited a very long time to have children for reasons that we may talk about later, but a big part of me believed that if I had them at an earlier point in my career, that would be the end of my growth, because that's what I had observed. It doesn't make it true, it just means that was the experience I was exposed to. And so what I want people to know, that if they want to have a family, and if they don't, more power to them, so there's no judgment in this statement, but if this is something that they want, there's never a right time. There's never a perfect time. There's never a lull in the busyness of one's life or one's job. So if you want things, you alone have to make the decision about what it is that matters, and then you have to carve out space because, these are choices that we all get to make. And if you don't do that, someone else will take that time,
Yeah, and I mean, you hit it on the head about, you want to raise readers, you set aside time to read with your children.
Yeah.
Obviously in our house, health and fitness is a huge part of how we raise our kids.
Yeah.
And so I am with my kids in the pool at swimming lessons, and I am with my kids on the floor at gymnastics.
Yeah.
I'm not sitting in a room somewhere taking a call. I'm on the floor with them doing a cartwheel or doing whatever. That is extremely important to me. It takes up a huge amount of time. Okay, it would be so much easier for those of us here in Singapore, right, to send my helper with the kids over to the class. But no, I need to be there with them because I need that modeling to start in the home with us.
Yeah.
But like you said, you must then carve that time out of where it would go otherwise. And we're constantly making those trade-offs.
And the one additional build that I would say, and obviously I'm very fortunate to be in an incredibly supportive relationship in the form of my husband's commitment to raising our children together, but who you have as a partner, a true partner in that process, makes all the difference.
Yeah.
So having someone who you can tag team with, who you can say, I've got this, you go do that, and or, the trades that you can make with each other because you are both in it deeply and committed to how it should be experienced by your kids. Yeah.
So Amanda, you know how I've been on this journey about improving my sleep?
Oh, you have been obsessed about it lately.
Well, I have found something that has been incredible. Cozy Earth bed sheets.
Ooh, that's saying a lot because you are really picky about your sleep setup.
Exactly. These sheets are made from bamboo viscose. They are naturally breathable and I get the perfect night's sleep. They keep me cool all night.
Oh, and I've been eyeing the pajamas too. They are so chic and super cozy.
It's a total game changer and so relaxing for the evenings.
And what's crazy is that Cozy Earth actually ships to Singapore. Orders over $560 ship free. And in the US, orders over $50 ship free.
And did you know you can get your biggest ever discount, 41%, if you use code TFF today?
So head over to cozyearth.com and use that code TFF today.
Obviously, you are making sacrifices. What sort of things have you had to sacrifice in order to have the career that you want and obviously spend that time with your family? So, is there something particular that you would otherwise love to do, but you've had to say no to?
I'll try and not make this frivolous.
But it can be as well, by the way.
Look, there's a finite number of hours in the day, so I think that's obviously one part of it. Confessions on a podcast. I am not a big sleeper, which is not necessarily a point of pride, but, one of the things that obviously I made choices about very early in my career in terms of this idea of really putting in the time and the work was, burning the candle at both ends. Mm-hmm. So I think probably the biggest sacrifices for me before I had children were things that actually had long-term health implications, and not understanding that the sacrifices I was making, the choices I was making, that I didn't have to make those. I didn't have to give those things up. I wish someone had said to me, it's okay to say no to that. You don't have to literally stay in the office 24 hours, sleep under your desk, like that kind of situation. And that's not to suggest that I love the hustle when things are intense and they're moving fast and, you're in it and you're in the trenches with people. But I also think that everybody does need to be able to breathe, Simple things for me, it's funny when people ask me some advice around leadership. One of the first things that I say to them, my absolute non-negotiable is hydration.
Yes, you're so good at it.
And honestly, it's funny because people look at you like, I'm sorry, was that your big epiphany?
I'm like, yeah. I better have some water.
And people know I carry a very large bottle, but the brain is a very large percentage made up of water. Mm-hmm. And when you are dehydrated, the first thing that goes is your mental acuity, that clarity, that sharpness of thought. So if you are go, if you are the person that the buck stops with you have to make the decision, you have to carry the thing, you have to drink water. It's crazy, but there you go. So.
Yeah. Nice. And I love it. No, and again, you are really a model of drinking water, by the way, as someone who sees your water log. It's very, very impressive. You mentioned how kind of the conventional script for moms in corporate, right, was to just kind of sweep the kids under the rug, not sweep under the rug, but not bring it up, right? Yeah. It's this thing that exists outside of work in the capsule that is not to do with work. I would say that this is also where your health has been siloed out to when you are a high-performing, high-functioning, public-facing corporate female.
Yeah.
But you are someone who doesn't do that. You are someone who is actually quite forthcoming about some of your health struggles. Mm. And I think probably one that you and I have talked about quite a bit is your current struggle with endometriosis.
Yeah.
Are you willing to open up a little bit about how that journey has unfolded over the past year and a half?
Sure. So I think maybe the starting point I would say is, for me, certainly in a professional setting, vulnerability is not a default. It's actually something that I've had to learn both to do and to get comfortable or more comfortable with. I definitely saw kind of the path to success, as I said, kind of defined in a certain way, but also that as a female, even at the earlier stages of my career, that in a lot of ways kind of holding things back was a little bit like having protective armor. And so not saying everything, not sharing everything, not bringing people into some of my experiences or challenges was a way, in theory, to not distract them and have them focus on the thing, which was the work product, as opposed to whatever's going on with the person. I do not recommend that to other people, but that is part of the truth of what I have done. I think that there's just a truth that when you live with chronic pain, it changes you. And I think for me, because my path to a diagnosis with endometriosis, so I have stage 4 invasive endo, which is quite severe. And it took, almost 30 years for me to get my diagnosis.
Oh, my God.
And a lot of that, when I think about kind of some of the reasons why I was masking my pain symptoms and or, pushing through, moving on, compartmentalizing that particular component of my life, is because I really sincerely thought that if people knew that I was in constant pain, they would think I was weak and that therefore I was not leadership material.
So how did you get through just the day-to-day? How did you do it? Because stage 4, that must have been, oh, God.
It's a debilitating level of pain that happens cyclically all the time.
Yeah. So people that have endometriosis that are in stage 4 invasive generally would say that they are on a 7 out of 10 pain scale all the time.
Fucking hell.
And I think that one of the things for me is living with pain for an extended period of time and seeking advice from medical professionals only to be met with versions of that's normal, that's what it's like being a woman. Everyone has that. You just need to toughen up. That sounds like it's probably more in your head than it is in your body. These are real statements by medical professionals, and irrespective of, this is not to throw shade on the profession, but there's so much that's not understood about this disease. And the average person takes 7 to 10 years to get a diagnosis because it takes them that long to be believed.
It's just terrible.
It's terrible, but it's also, it's not what we should settle for.
Yes.
And so I think the short answer of how do you do it is you just do it. I don't have you just show up every day and you do the best that you can. And for me, sometimes that means, the day's marked in very small moments as opposed to kind of, large swaths of time, because getting through those things requires different kinds of coping strategies.
So were you always on like painkillers or?
No. So interestingly, I always felt that would be the wrong path for me.
Okay.
Again, maybe some of that kind of in my own head about this concept of strength and weakness, but also, particularly as I became a mother, there are a lot of things that you can't do, both when you are pregnant but also when you are breastfeeding. And so that never felt like it was a long-term strategy for me. I always felt like I had to find other things. So, one of the things I'm so grateful for in my working relationship with Amanda is we share a mantra that movement is medicine. And, that might sound counterintuitive, but for me, moving my body has actually been one of the saving graces of, dealing with pain. I think that for me, one of the reasons why I found that I had this disease was because I desperately wanted to have children. But the funny thing for me, or the ironic thing, is that it took a fertility kind of experience as opposed to just a general health, women's health or reproductive health conversation to unearth this. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't until I was, at a place where we had kind of given up hope that we were going to be able to be parents, that this diagnosis changed that for us. But the challenge is that endometriosis is actually, it's a very clever and somewhat insidious disease, because there are ways that the symptoms can be abated, they can be, kind of lessened, but they never go away. And so, I've had periods of no pain when I was pregnant, when I was breastfeeding with my children, but I am, not pain-free, and I would love to have that be my truth, and it's just not. So, I don't say this to be very clear because I want anyone to give me sympathy, but one of the big things for me is realizing that people deal with so much below the surface that you never know about, and it costs you nothing to be kind. And I think about some of the ways that people have and haven't shown up for me, some, many of whom did not know this was going on in the background, but there are basic things that I think we can always extend to each other. So my journey, I think, has been both, coming to a place where I trust myself. I decide to listen to my body rather than to ignore it. And also that I take agency over the experience that I have when people dismiss me. In some ways, the more I have learnt about endometriosis, the more I have felt the confidence to challenge, to ask questions, to seek alternatives. And I think that's a really hard thing for a lot of women to do, particularly when you're dealing with expertise that is presented with, complete absolution. Yeah. These are the solutions, or this is not a problem.
Take it or leave it.
Yeah, and so, I guess my request, my invitation to any woman, listen to your body. If it is giving you a message, it means something. Yeah. And generally, it whispers first and then it shouts. Yeah. And you don't have to wait until it's shouting before you take it seriously, but so many of us do because we don't put ourselves and our own health first.
Yeah. Can we have a feminist moment about
this?
Yes.
Hurrah.
You said you had 30 years before you got a diagnosis.
Yeah.
But isn't it interesting that you got that diagnosis validated when you began your fertility journey?
Yeah.
Because that is when a woman gets to have worth. Oh, you want to have a baby? You're going to fulfill your reproductive potential? Well, now we can take you seriously.
Yeah.
Up until then, though, your pain didn't matter. It's going to matter in this short window while you're having babies or needing to. And then once you're through that period, your pain will again go back under the radar because menopause, ain't nobody care, right?
Yeah.
So I just think, like I said, the feminist message there is like, you didn't even get to be taken seriously until fertility was in the equation. Then everybody wakes up.
And I think part of what is so frustrating about that is my story is actually not uncommon. The period of time that it took for my diagnosis may be slightly longer than other people, but when we say it takes 7 to 10 years, and we say 1 in 7 women around the world have this disease, that's just of the people we know.
Yes.
Yeah. See, you think about the fact that so many women sit on a life in pain with the assumption that this is their lot in life, and also that we are strong, we are resilient, our bodies are built to tolerate a lot more by default of being capable of childbirth. And because of that, we put this off. We don't listen to ourselves, we kind of quieten that, and we think that actually this is acceptable. But I think about, some of the language that I have heard from really wonderful advocates that have talked more about how they have progressed in their endometriosis journey. Being able to say to a medical professional, this is impacting my quality of life, is not a dismissible statement. I am in pain can often be seen as a subjective comment. But, there are ways that you can equip yourself, and I think this is part of where, for me, in a lot of ways, the more you learn, the more you can't but want to be more active and advocate for this space and for other women who might not be where they need to be in their journey.
I guess even from an insurance perspective, if it's not affecting your quality of life, then it's not going to get covered. But, if it's stopping you from doing something...
Having a baby.
Then
it gets noticed.
And
I think you mentioned that there were periods of no pain because there were periods of no periods.
Yes.
Right? I mean, this is the only reason that you were freed from this pain is because you were having babies and breastfeeding. And again, that also sets up a really unfair storyline where it's like, well, as long as you stay in the constant reproductive cycle, which again, we were lucky to have been able to do that, 3 babies in 5 years. As long as you stay there, though, then you get spared the pain. And when it comes back, because again, it will come back monthly with your cycle and often in between, then now it's something that, you just kind of have to grit and bear it. No, absolutely not.
Were you on the contraceptive pill during...
It's a great question, so no. And I think this is actually one of the things that's really interesting when you think about women's understanding of their bodies and of the implications of the choices that we make or that other people make for us. So I got my period very early. I was an early bloomer, perhaps, and I knew immediately when I got it that I was in a lot of pain. A lot of women, girls, when they first have that experience, if they are fortunate to have a parent or a caregiver who takes them for advice from a medical professional, very often the first point of intervention is that they are offered some form of birth control to deal with the symptoms. Because to be very clear, birth control is a hormonal suppressant. And if, for example, you have endometriosis, estrogen, which your body desperately needs, is actually the problem. Estrogen is the thing that feeds endometriosis and causes it to flare. And so the more estrogen your body has, and in those early years in particular, you have a wonderful supply because it's building your bone density, it's building your muscle mass, it's building, kind of your mental acuity and clarity. There are so many things that are wonderful that it does for your body. But for my body, it's working against me. So the suppression of estrogen, in theory, stops the symptom. But what we don't talk about is if you are, a teenager and you get on birth control, and then you're on it for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years before you decide perhaps that you want to get off it, whether it's for reproduction or otherwise, you have done something to your body that you don't always fully understand the implications of, meaning that the baseline of how your body experiences menstruation may be altered forever.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because actually I was put on birth control pill when I was 14 because I had crazy, ridiculously long, like 3 months long, heavy bleeding, nonstop. And they were like, oh, okay, well, just, we've tried a few things, didn't work. We'll get you on this. This will help. And of course it helped, It basically controlled my period. It made me have regular periods, obviously not real periods. But ever since that, I was on it for a long time. And then I think it was when I came to Singapore, I decided to come off. And then that's when I realised that my periods are not normal, they're not regular. And ever since then, I've just had issue after issue. Now, obviously, it wasn't the pill itself. There's obviously, loads of different factors that played into it, to the point where I started hitting perimenopause at 37. So,
and like you said, it wasn't the pill itself, but it was the pill itself that blinded you from the ability to have this data about your functioning body, which is your menstrual cycle.
And the point is we're not demonizing the pill. I think birth control is an amazing, amazing tool for women to have choice and agency. But I think the thing that I would say, when we're talking about kind of injecting a wee bit of feminist energy, it's 2025 and there are no universally accepted medical metrics for menstruation. They don't exist.
They don't.
So there's is no version of what is normal. Now, I think what is normal is the wrong question. I think the question should be, what is right in your body? And if it doesn't feel right, how do you get to that place, right? So part of this for me is this amazing opportunity to say, okay, we don't know enough. You know, women's health, and in particular menstrual health and reproductive health, are one of the least funded and least researched. You know, it's sad to say this out loud. We only started doing research with menstrual blood in 2023.
What? 2 years ago?
And the thing that's amazing about that is that even in that very short amount of time, what we've already been able to learn about what a rich source of biodata menstrual blood is, that, for example, it contains stem cells that are unlike the presence of stem cells anywhere else in the body.
Wow.
And you think about the fact that every month your body is effectively shedding a part of itself and rebuilding it every single month. So it has regenerative qualities that we have no idea how they could be applied to other parts of our body, to other diseases. I mean, we are at the absolute beginning of understanding the potential of this.
My mind is blown right now. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And again, just because we haven't had a way to study this, or we haven't had investment to be able to study this access to information doesn't exist. And that is a problem.
And so, you know, I look at this and I think, one, what an amazing opportunity for us to try and establish a baseline, because every woman in the world, everyone who menstruates, could benefit from at least understanding what's going on in my own body. Right? And if you have those kind of insights, you have agency over what you choose to do next. You know, does this feel normal? Does it feel right? Do I need advice? Do I need an intervention? And I think those are things that often only happen when we are in our most extreme state of whatever the issue potentially might be.
Can we talk about how no one prepares you for how your skin changes in your 40s?
Honestly, one day it's fine, the next it's dull, dry, and showing every single emotion you've ever felt.
That's why I've actually been loving Love Indus. Their skincare actually feels like it's doing something. It's not just sitting on your face and looking sticky.
It blends South Asian ingredients like ashwagandha and vegan ghee with proper New York dermatology tech. It's luxurious, but also very results-driven.
Their line limiter is especially good if you're starting, like me, to notice lip or laugh lines. People compare it to Botox, which I would happily take after all those needles in my face.
And our listeners get the highest discount they offer, 21% off with code TFF at loveindus.com.
Plus, they ship free to Singapore, which seems like a very rare little treat.
And yes, we earn commission when you use our code. So don't forget to support the show by using code TFF.
Well, again, a lot of information to digest there. We're going to lighten it up a little bit in
Yes,
here.
ma'am.
One of our favorite segments here on the Forties Formula, Hot or Hype.
Okay.
So we're going to present you kind of some hot topics and, you know, we'll say corporate world adjacent. Okay. You tell us if you think it's hot, meaning yes, on it, about it.
Okay.
Or it's hype.
Okay.
Nah, overblown too much. Okay. And you can qualify. Okay. You can qualify. So this isn't just a one word and then we move on. All right. Girl boss culture.
Hype.
Hype.
Total hype. I think that the idea that you have to boss in a certain way, why is it girls and not women? Why do we have to caveat say that's a female doctor or a female leader? At some point, I would like that to not be a thing.
Yes.
And we got to do a lot of work before we get to that place.
Yes. Oh, I love it. Okay. Morning wellness routines.
Hype.
Good. I feel the same, but tell me why.
Well, I'm a mother of 3 very young kids. Who has time in the morning for anything but getting them out the door dressed and you know.
And who has routine in the morning? Meaning like every morning in our house is a different version of chaos. So the only thing routine about it is that it's nuts.
I mean, it does get better because I feel so
Bless
for
you.
me, I
We need to hear this.
am going to say like morning's the only time I can have a routine. And I like my routine, maybe because I'm a morning person, maybe, you know. And obviously the boys are now self-sufficient, as in I will go in there to wake them up, but they can put their own clothes on, they'll brush their own teeth, they'll wash their own bum, you know, I don't have to worry.
How many diapers?
0.
I know, it's like you're living the dream.
Yeah, tell me more about your magical unicorn world. All right, hot or hype, the 4-day work week.
Hot.
Oh, I
tell us
like
more.
that.
So I think that there's a false equivalency with the idea the amount of time that you put into a thing determines the value of the output that you give to that thing. I think that the work week was designed many, many moons ago for a very specific target set of professionals that may not necessarily include this room and or you know, people outside of it that look and feel like us. So I think that the idea of actually hyper-focused, laser-focused, hyper-efficient. There's so many ways that you can do this. And I say this as a perfect example to other mothers of 3. There was a time in your life when you didn't have children. And I give this in the corporate context. I was asked to do a presentation. I could labor over the joy of that presentation, those slides. I could perfect, perfectly justified to the right. All the colours worked. I'm going to agonize over those words. Let's sleep on it, think about it again. It could be a week's worth of work, a month's worth of work before it was perfect and it was out the door. And now oftentimes the request is you've got an hour because that's all I've got between pickup and, something else. So one of the things about motherhood is it forces you to be incredibly focused.
Yes.
You become an efficiency master because you have no choice. But my goodness, if that skill was valued the way that it actually shows up, more women who are working mothers would be in more positions of authority.
You're absolutely correct. I was just listening to a podcast, and I'm terrible that I can't remember the doctor's name, but a doctor, and she was saying that exactly what you're saying about agonizing over every last graphic on your PowerPoint slide. Right? She was saying that she was invited as a panelist, and then when she showed up to the event, they were like, "Oh, it's actually a TED Talk format." And you're the TED Talk.
Oh, I know. It was the obesity doctor, right?
Yes.
God, I've forgotten her name as well.
Oh, God, we're terrible. We'll put it in the show notes. That's always our excuse, right? We'll put it in the show notes. But yeah, she was like, so I had literally 5 minutes while the previous panel was finishing up to put together a 15-minute TED Talk of my own accord. And she was like, you just got to get it done.
And I bet you she kicked butt.
She did because it went viral. It went viral.
Yes.
It went completely
viral.
Yeah.
Check the show notes.
So she's the obesity doctor who said that obesity is genetic, but it went viral for the wrong reason because people were like, it's
after her about it.
Yeah. It's not genetic, but actually if you listen to the whole thing,
it's incredible.
It's great.
All right. Hot or hype, the motherhood penalty.
Hot.
Sadly hot, isn't it?
It is the real deal. And I think even organizations that have the very best of intentions and real policies don't always understand that this exists and shows up in ways that they can't necessarily predict or protect working mums from. And I would, to some degree, I categorize also working parents because dads that make different choices, also have impact. But for mums, it's a real thing.
Yeah, it is. Last one, hot or hype, women-only networking. So networks available to only women.
Hot.
Yeah. What about podcasts for women?
Podcasts that are only open to women.
So I will say this, I'm very intentional with my time and I love deeply supporting and uplifting women and girls. It's something that I draw a tremendous amount of joy from and I see as being a gift that I can give. I think that when you do women-only things, there's a power that comes from that. There's a safety in a community. But I also think that if you exclude men from every conversation, they cannot be the true allies and partners they need to be for us to make the kind of progress, the lasting progress that we actually need. That's the path to gender equality. Yeah. We're not going to get there if it's just women solving the problem for women.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. You need the investment from everyone to solve these problems.
Yeah.
Well, Gal, we've had a lot to think about today. And again, a beautiful personal story from you. And we thank you for that. But we would love the benefit of your expertise and the question that we ask everyone on this show. What is your 40s formula? What is the nugget, the golden nugget of advice you can provide for our audience about how to thrive in this decade?
So I am going to borrow words from my favorite poet. Mary Oliver has a piece called Sometimes, and it goes, instructions to live a life, pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. You have to pay attention to everything, but especially to yourself. Especially in your 40s as women, we are so accustomed to putting everyone else and everything else first, and it's time that we give ourselves the space that we deserve and the time that we need. Be astonished, for me, one of the greatest lessons my children have taught me is to see the world with wonder.
Yeah.
And we lose that so quickly as we grow up. How can I come into things with the same lens that they have about all the possibilities in front of me, not just all the problems, and hold on to that for as long as I can so that I can see, that the world actually can be a great place and I can have a contributive role in that. And then tell about it. As women in particular, so often we think that our story is not going to be relevant or helpful or additive or valuable to somebody else. But every time you share lived experience, you share difficult things, you share beautiful things. What you are teaching people intentionally, generously, is that life is for living, but also that we all get to be part of helping each other have a better experience.
Oh my God, that is just beautiful.
And you're such an incredible storyteller. Thank you for sharing the power of your story, the authenticity of your experience, and just being with us today, Amy. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
It
Thank
was
you.
an amazing conversation. Thank you.
I'm now basically set for the day.
I'm just saying. I know what you get out of it.